We acknowledge that the Jacob Burns Film Center in Pleasantville, New York, is located on traditional Munsee Lenape and Wappinger land. We are grateful to work on this land and encourage all who join us to reflect on the traditional keepers of the land they occupy.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. Hey, I'm saying hi to you and to our audience.
Exactly.
Hello, everyone tuning in from one of the 4 places this is broadcasting or watching much later in the future. Welcome to the Q&A for QT Shorts, a pop-up film series connecting audiences to short films made by queer and trans filmmakers. I'm Brit Fryer. My pronouns are he and him, and I am so happy to be joined by my partner in crime, my co-curator, Arno Mokros, whose pronouns are he and him, as you can see in our tags. Arno?
Sure. We're really excited to welcome 4 of the filmmakers behind the films in this set. They showcase recent festival highlights, talent from the Jacob Burns Film Center's own community, and more. We think the films in this program are really just a small glimpse of the range of talent and styles and genres and stories being produced by contemporary queer filmmakers. And we think that this block reminds us that there is no monolithic narrative, which is perhaps especially relevant and prudent to remember since it's Pride Month, everybody. Happy Pride. We also wanted to acknowledge our sponsors, or rather a sponsor. QT Shorts is sponsored by the Greater New York Arts Development Fund of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, which is administered by the Brooklyn Arts Council. We are also incredibly grateful and thankful to our colleagues and our friends at the Jacob Burns Film Center who have supported this series and helped us bring it to light. It will be up on the Burns' virtual marquee through June 24th. The program is totally free, so if you haven't already, hope you will check it out. Britt, I'll pass it over.
Amazing. I get the pleasure to introduce a few of our filmmakers from our block. We have, again, as Arno said, we have 4 talented people with us today. I'm going to do brief introductions and Arno will bring them onto the screen. The first person we have is M. Weinstein, pronouns they and them. M is a writer, a director of plays for my theater lovers out there, a writer of television films, musical and interactive installations. They're most recently a writer on Amazon's reboot of A League of Their Own, and they are the writer and director of the film in this block called In France, Michelle is a Man's Name. Hi, Em.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Our United States, including the National Film Festival for Talented Youth, they are here with the film Baby Steps. Hey, Kira. Awesome.
So happy to be here.
Happy to have you. The next filmmaker is Livia Wong, pronouns she and her. Livia Wong of Who Can Predict What Will Move You is a queer Chinese-American film director from Baltimore, currently based in Brooklyn. Her short films have screened at the Berlin International Film Festival, where Livia's just coming from 3 hours ago, and the new directors, new films, and more. Welcome, Livia. Hey. And our last filmmaker is Lauren Minarat, pronouns she and her. Some of you tuning in from the Burns community might know Lauren. Lauren is the Fall 2019 Women Filmmaker Fellow in the Creative Culture Program at the Jacob Burns Film Center. Her work has screened at festivals around the world, and she's been featured in Filmmaker Magazine, Short of the Week, and as a Vimeo staff pick. Hey, Lauren, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
So good to see all of you. So I'll start with our first question, and I like to, of course, keep it broad, and we'll do a thing where we sort of go around and I'll call on someone first. So starting with something easy, I just want to hear where this project came from. For our folks working in documentary, want to hear about like how you got that original idea, and then for my narrative folks, would love to hear what you were sort of thinking about when you started writing that script. And I will pick on M first.
Yes, I love this question. I was really hungry to tell a story about trans masculinity. I feel like there aren't enough stories out there, and especially stories that aren't like a traditional coming out narrative or a black and white sort of sad or happy story, but something that just feels complicated and cinematic and messy and as like deep and troubling and painful sometimes as life is. So I grew up going to rural Oregon. My dad has lived there since I was young and wanted to tell a story that sort of dealt with this landscape and thus like dealt with this sort of Western genre. And then my best friend Ari is a non-actor who I know is secretly an actor. And so I kind of put all of these ideas together, like trans masculinity, this location, and my best friend, and was like, what movie are we going to make? And that's sort of how it came to be.
Awesome. Kira, do you want to talk about Baby Steps and where it came from?
Yeah, so Baby Steps is, of course, very personal. It's like a personal narrative about my own gender journey. And I have been so fascinated by all the media lately about middle school, like Pen 15. I've just been obsessed. Like I cannot turn away from it. So I was really thinking about how my interactions with boys in middle school really kind of were formative in finding like the fissures where my gender didn't quite fit, or the way that they were talking to me, like just didn't match. So I sort of started there and then was thinking like, how do I identify now and what kind of films would I want to see? And so it's really just a collage of all these different thoughts and images. And I made it a few years ago, so it's actually interesting to see how I've changed since then, but it's really like a monument to that time in my life. Yeah.
Awesome. I can't wait to ask you about things that have, how you think about the film now from the past, or from the present. Livia, you want to talk to us about where the film sort of came from?
Yeah, the concrete seed was I used to go down to the basketball and handball courts at Grand Street in Manhattan, Chinatown, and just watch all the Chinese boys play basketball there. Mainly because I was just always longing for my own community, because I grew up like with not many other Asian Americans around. And then I was also thinking back to parts of my life growing up where you don't really have the language to describe certain relationships you have yet. And then they kind of only become apparent later what the contours and the queer relationships are. So I think I wanted to, basically I smashed them together. And yeah, so I think it was like, I was really interested in the relationships I saw that I wasn't a part of at the basketball court. But then also I had my own kind of like questions about relationships I had that I wanted to kind of infuse that with.
Awesome. And I will turn the question to Lauren. I know you made this film in 2016, but if you can think back, what were you thinking about, and where did the idea for The Morning After come from?
Well, actually, I think I made it sometime in 2017, but initially came about because I was at South by Southwest in 2017 with another film that Taylor Hess, who plays Nicole in The Morning After, was also in. And we were hanging out and stuff, and she was somewhat familiar with my work. And when we got back, she read some scripts of mine, and she told me that she really wanted to work with me, and she wanted to make a short with me. So I hadn't made a film since film school, which was like at that point almost 8 years ago. And I was like really itching to make something, but I didn't really have the resources. So Taylor and I were kind of like bouncing ideas around and stuff, but need use of something that could be made cheaply with like a skeleton crew, which is just something very simple. And one day I was in the shower and the idea just kind of came to me. And it was 2017, so it was shortly after Trump had been sworn in. And I know I, at the time, had a very complicated relationship with that election, like, and so did so many other people, and everyone had like a different relationship with that election, just like based on their own life experiences and their own like relationship, like with where they feel they fit in this country. And so I just kind of felt like the meet the parents over lunch situation was like a really good opportunity to kind of explore the tapestry of like all these different types of people and the relationship with this country and with that particular election. And my relationship with that election has changed since 2017, but it very much feels like a time capsule of like how I was feeling at that time.
Yeah, I wanna stay on you, Lauren, because I think we have some questions for each individual filmmaker. So Lauren, would love to stay on you because your film does capture this really specific moment after the 2016 election. And, you know, Arno sort of said that he could remember for himself, like waking up the morning after and after the party and sort of living the experience that is in the first part of this film. So what is it like to look back on this film at this moment in 2021 after we've had a whole other election? I know like how you think about the film and what you sort of think about looking back.
I don't know. I mean, in a way, the film almost feels like it's more relevant just because we had some space from it, if that makes sense. I think when it came out, we all were so close to that supercharged experience that it was hard to just see it as a film. Like we all were like kind of like projecting our own like experiences onto it. And it was hard to really separate our own like kind of like visceral experiences with that from the film. But now when I watch it, it feels like I'm like watching just like a movie as like as a part of an audience, and not like I just like went through what the characters are going through, if that makes sense. So I think that the distance has actually in a way helped my relationship with the film.
Cool. Arno?
Yeah, I was gonna say that would be interesting in thinking about like a story that's so personal but also like has a collective element to it. And Kira, I think that your film really speaks to maybe like a shared experience for queer folks, and especially for trans and non-binary folks, navigating like language and like what feels right and what doesn't. And I was thinking about this particular moment that I especially love in your film, where the animation of the different terms that might be used to describe you, and the ones that really are incomplete in your words, or also more authentic or less so. And I think that's such an interesting way of dealing with language and also with the perception. And I think about this in terms of like film being a inherently visual medium. And I think that for myself, even as a filmmaker and as like a creative person, there's a certain amount of anxiety around how to present queer and trans experiences on film, because you sort of run the risk of having the same incomplete assumptions be made based off of someone's visual appearance. So I was wondering what your thoughts were about that, and maybe in terms of like specifically making this film and grappling with those kinds of questions. But I also think that that's a sort of broader question for the whole group about how to make queer movies, or what that even means.
Yeah, I think I definitely felt that question throughout the whole process, and of course still think about it. But because I think I had a lot of fear making that film and like using some words to describe myself, that I think I was worried that people in my life would think, that doesn't really map on to how I see Kira, or even how Kira like talks about themselves in public. And that's an interesting part of the film for me now to look back on, because I think that's the part that has changed the most, is like a lot of what I say, oh, I don't like this word, I don't like this word, are like totally different 2 years later. But I think it was important to me to have the part when I say I'm meeting myself again and again to really show like I am changing all the time, and I think like that's what I see in queer films a lot of the time, is like this incomplete sense or state as something to aspire to or something to be inspired by. And I do struggle with, what people maybe outside of the queer community might see, or how it's like, one voice speaking for the community or something like that. But I think in my own work, I try to just think about the film that I would want to see, or the younger self and what that person would want to see. And that's like the really complicated, uncomfortable, hard to understand stuff, like when I was making this film, I'm in a long-term relationship with like a cis man who I've been dating for a long time, and putting dyke on the screen, I was like, maybe someone's gonna be really uncomfortable with me like claiming this label, and I think like it's been important to me, and something I want to aspire to keep doing in my films is like making those uncomfortable choices that feel a little bit like pushing up against what the expectations might be, but that's where like the truth really happens. And that's probably like what I'm most proud about this film, is how it's like really honest.
So anyone else want to tackle that question that Arno posed? Arno, do you want to pose it again to the rest of
sure. Like, what are the actually, maybe another way of putting it is like, there are definitely like challenges around sort of depicting queer identity and queer lives on screen, but there are also opportunities, and I'm really curious about like what sort of inspires each one of you about conveying the complexity and navigating that in both like positive but fraught ways as well.
I'll go.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like the biggest challenge is one of like who the audience is. Like my community is pretty queer and pretty trans and like, frankly, like pretty trans masculine. So when I was making this film, I was like speaking to them more than I was speaking to like, cis white 60-year-old men. And yet like a lot of people who saw it were and continue to see it are cis white 60-year-old men. And I think hearing their reaction has like taught me a lot as a filmmaker, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I think they definitely miss some of the nuance, but at the same time, like they take things that I am, surprised that they took, or they get it in a way that like I never thought they could get it. And I think that is both like exciting and makes me realize that like these conversations are filtering out into the world a lot more than I realized, but also can be scary because I've had people take things from this film that are like the exact opposite of what I intended. And what's nice about shorts and about like festivals like this one is I at least get to engage those conversations a little bit. But I think what's wonderful about the future of queer cinema and the fact that like it is becoming more of a mainstream thing is that hopefully we'll be getting better and better at having those conversations, and audiences will be getting more and more used to having those conversations and can have those conversations like with more nuance and with more grace as the years go on. But yeah, my 2 cents.
It's interesting thinking about I mean, I think oftentimes like queer filmmakers, their a significant audience is like queer film festivals, and sometimes it can feel a little bit like screenings are an echo chamber of like queer folks like talking to themselves or creating media that is like meant to like serve multiple audiences, but there is kind of like that anxiety about like being legible to cis or straight audiences, and also like sort of embracing an opportunity there. So I think a big part of like this project, Q2 Shorts, is also like to kind of like break down sort of the actual sort of like festival barrier to seeing shorts, and to interact with audiences who are coming in with a little bit of context for queer and trans experience, or a lot, and for all these ranges of experiences to be sort of embraced and help, I guess.
I thought it was interesting that you used the word legibility, Arno, because I think about that a lot. Like I think a lot about what I want to make legible and what I want to conceal or withhold. And I do feel like with queer cinema, like the possibility I'm always excited by is like also challenging form, because like representation isn't one-to-one, form and meaning aren't one-to-one. And I feel like it's always, this is kind of the strength of like queer filmmakers I really love. Like thinking back to your earlier question, like I feel like a good example of a movie that shows like, it's like So Pretty by Jessie Dunn Rovinelli, where you have a multiplicity of different gender expressions, different bodies, and different relationships. And it's all very matter of fact because it's just how it is. And like, there is no explanation. You're just in it. And I think that's like a beautiful example of like the kind of cinema I want to make, where it's just, you either buy it or you don't, but I'm not particularly concerned with it if you don't,
Yeah. Olivia, I want to, we can continue to talk about this Arno's question, I think, throughout the time. So anytime people feel like, I want to say something about that, like, feel free to do so. I think that's really a driving question for all of us, and a driving question that we want to, tackle in this whole series. Olivia, I want to talk to you about your film. There's something so intimate, the sense of longing is just, there's so much. And I've heard you speak about how that sense of longing came from sort of you as a filmmaker looking at maybe, the boys in the basketball courts and communities that you sort of were seeing. And I want to know how you translated that into what these actors are doing. Like, how do you as a director take these really deep and complicated emotions like longing and talk to your actors and get sort of the performances that you're looking for? How do you approach working with actors?
I think the main thing is just finding the people that actually are like that already. Like Sammy and Condor were just so deeply thoughtful, artistic, sensitive people. And I really actually changed the idea to kind of fit them, because I was I was watching a lot of dance documentaries, and always like the choreographer talks about how they make the dance on the dancer, like it's on their body, and that's inseparable. And so I felt that this was a great way to approach making a short. Like, I'm casting people and I want to make it on them because they're the people. And I felt so influenced by how Sammy's a dancer, was just so sensitive and open and generous with their thoughts, their feelings. They were just like vibrating at just the right frequency. Condor was also so sweet, so open. And we just had like lots of conversations where I was talking about, I wasn't asking them to like reveal like their relationships, but I was saying like, in my past, I've had relationships where, like it was so weirdly fraught. Like it was so like we were like fighting, but like, why were we fighting? Like, did you have these relationships that you didn't come to understand until like later maybe? And then we would talk about it. I would show them like other media that inspired me. Like, there's this dancer / media theorist, Barbara Browning, that does these hand vids. I had done my own hand vid after my roommate had done a hand vid. I was like, oh, hand vids are cool. And so I'd shown my hand vid to Sammy right before we were supposed to film. And I played a song for them to listen to in earbuds. And then they just did that on their own because they're a dancer. And I like totally trusted that, it'd be something that would feel organic. So I really just do think it's like you have to find the right people that are willing to like respond to this sort of thing. Because for me, like the script was not important. I ended up cutting most of the dialogue anyways. I was just really interested in like having like a genuine dynamic.
Cool, thank you. Anna, do you want to ask our next question?
Sure, I might go off script if that's cool.
Go off script. Go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like actors, related to your question just now for it, to Olivia. But it occurred to me that in both The Morning After and in France, Michel Zimand's name, there is this role of like a father figure, and kind of like this relief that happens, like the father figure like represents something that's maybe like more conservative or like of the past. And I'm interested just to hear like both you, Lauren and Em, just to talk about like those roles, like the sort of the not queer characters, like the central people who are not queer and who are like kind of in opposition to in some ways. And maybe in opposition to is oversimplifying, because I think it's definitely more complicated than that, I think, particularly in France. So I just would love to hear your thoughts about that. And I'm also just curious, like in working with those actors, like what was there some amount of like having to sort of explain context or to like find the right person to like even be able to engage in those stories? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so my dad did not vote for Trump. And I feel a little bad for him because I think like people might think that he did. He actually hates Donald Trump.
I was not assuming that with the question, but good to know.
I mean, yeah, I do, but the point is though is that I feel he's not like necessarily based on my own father, but I feel like I knew a lot of queer people around that time whose parents were voting for Trump. And what I thought was so interesting about that was that they would try to talk to their parents about it and how much it like personally hurt them, but their parents were just, you know, of a different generation, and they couldn't see why this decision was so hurtful for their children, who they otherwise were otherwise accepting of who their kids were. You know what I mean? Like these were friends of mine, had parents who were totally cool with them having same-sex partners, or not fitting into like a particular gender norm, but their parents were still going to vote for someone whose running mate had an abhorrent record with LGBTQ rights. And so it was interesting to like write a character who is hurting his daughter so much, but it just doesn't see like why this decision is personal for his daughter, you know, and like why his conservative his outlook and his behavior prior to this election is hurtful for his daughter. And the guy we cast was actually, so Taylor and Adenike played the couple, and they were classmates at NYU, and the man we cast was their professor. So there was already kind of this like familiar relationship between the three of them. And I think what we most talked about was like the layers to like this character, and how to his daughter and her girlfriend's face, he can act like he's cool with it, he has no issue, but at the same time he's like embarrassed to bring his daughter and her girlfriend to his wedding, you know, and he can still vote for this man who has an abhorrent record for LGBTQ rights, you know, just because he wants his taxes lower because he's always a Republican. So yeah, I don't know. I just think that dynamic of like being so disengaged from like the way your decisions are hurting people is a really interesting thing to explore in a character.
I'll jump in.
And go for it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet was a little funky. I had to get on a hotspot, so thanks for your patience.
All good.
Yeah, I think we wanted to cast someone who really felt like an old cowboy movie star as the dad, because we were trying to play on a Western. We also had to cast the dad out of Oregon because we couldn't afford to fly someone in, and we were flying in a bunch of people from LA and New York. And we met a lot of great actors. And then Jerry walked in, who played the dad. He just like was the guy. And it was sort of a risk in a way because I didn't really know him. Jerry's really quiet. He sort of comes off as an old cowboy. I mean, he was wearing all his own clothes. Like that's what he came into the audition looking like. That's how he dresses. And we ended up having just like some amazing conversations in rehearsal. Ari is also like super generous and was really patient with kind of describing why we were going around and doing pronouns. And like Jerry ended up having a really like deep connection to this character and ended up like not only learning a lot, but like really connecting a lot. I mean, for me, like the father's gender is almost more important in the story than the son's, and is in crisis throughout the film, but especially like in the climactic scene, like it is about him in crisis. And as I turn the short into a feature that I'm working on right now, and like it really is about the father's gender crisis and his trans son sort of helping him deal with what it means to be a man as like an older person, because, you know, masculinity is like cis white masculinity is such a a prison, especially even for the people who seem to get the most privilege from it. So yeah, I think we really lucked out, and Jerry is a very, very cool person who's had a very interesting life. He dated Carole King briefly. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing that with the world. He has a big potato tattoo. He's so cool. But he ended up like sobbing on the last day of shooting and just being like, thank you for letting me tell this story, because I really love this dad, and I wanted to show how much this dad is trying to the world. And I was like, I think that's beautiful, and I think you get what we're trying to do. And yeah, I felt lucky, but also like if we hadn't had time for rehearsals and conversations, it might not have been such a joyful process.
Maybe that leads to sort of an interesting question about like process and about like what happens on set, because I think I mean Britt and I both think about this a lot, where it's like it's not just about sort of, well, it's not representation per se, but it's not just about like what happens on screen, it's also what happens off, right? It's like who your DP is, it's like who everybody on set is, because that kind of like makes an environment in which you can actually like tell queer stories like that, like breathe. I don't know if that's a full thought. Britt, do you have an additional? You want to complete my question?
I think I can. I suppose to all of our filmmakers, would love to hear about like the teams around this film, and like who you sort of brought in as trusted collaborators, especially to tell stories that are personal and stories that are intimate and stories that are in a lot of ways like tied to questions that we're having about identity, or about emotions that we're feeling. How do you bring on people? How do you build that trust? And any filmmaker can take this. Who's gonna bite? Should I call on someone? Livia, how do you think about this?
I think it's always a process. I would say that it feels very scary to feel like you're the only one that could understand the film. So you definitely you want to avoid that situation as much as possible. I think in the case of Who Can, I felt so grounded by Sammy and Condor. This was Sammy's first acting role. I had met them because I was really struggling finding the right people. And I was looking at so many actors, and they all were like not the right vibe. And then I asked an actor I had worked with previously, who I knew a lot of people, and was also a filmmaker themselves. And they recommended Sammy, who was kind of like a new friend. But I was like, oh, okay, could be interesting. And then I remembered I had to like go to I remember now. There was like there was a Yellow Jackets party, like a queer Lunar New Year party. And it was like, oh, Sammy will be there. I have to go and like seduce Sammy to go into this project with me. And so I had to go like put on my like coolest clothes and be like, Sammy, please, like, please. And it turned out to be great. I think they had kind of already maybe made up their mind, but I was feeling really nervous because I was trying to figure out how to like convince them, right, that this is something that might be not in their wheelhouse, but like I saw like something. And then when they came to do the camera test, I was like, oh, there's like the sensitivity that really reads on camera. And then we just talked about it a lot. And I think really Sammy really like grounded me in the making of that particular film.
Casting in the club. I was going to put it in the chat, but I want everyone to hear casting at the club. Good to know.
It's like cruising actors.
Right. Lauren, Kira, want to touch on bringing on like the people around your films?
Well, I liked what Olivia said about there's this fear that no one is going to understand what you're making. And I think for me, like throughout just having trusted friends watch it, and, and I, for a while, was really had a lot of pop culture in it, and people were able to be like, that's not really what this seems to be about, So just like, I think even though this was a pretty like solitary process for me of making the film, since I kind of did all of the pieces, really like continually getting feedback from people I really trusted made a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, Taylor was the first person I was collaborating with, and she cast Adenike and Noel, who plays the father. And really, we all just kind of, we were talking throughout the entire rehearsal process, and like everyone, especially Taylor and Adenike, brought their personal experience to the story, and that informed the script. Like the script was constantly evolving based on the actors' suggestions and stuff. You know, like at one point, we all decided that it would just be best to like not use the T word in the movie, and because it would be too distracting. So the act, like especially in this project in particular, the actors really were very much a collaborative force. And our crew was just like a skeleton crew of mostly trusted friends. My DP and I had like a really great relationship, and he had a really good relationship with the actors, and we didn't, you know, I mean, he knew how to like give the actors space and let them do their thing, and like not let his camera work feel like it was too imposing. He had a documentary background, which I think was really important for that fly on the wall feeling that the movie has. So yeah, overall it was like an incredibly lovely collaborative experience, and just a great reminder of how important it is to make sure that you mesh well with the people you're working with on these projects.
Yeah, I think like building also just a safe set that feels like in the moment, a place where creativity can happen is something that we take for granted a lot, because I mean, it's hard to do when you're super stressed out and you're making a short and you don't have enough time and enough money. And I think like having a crew for me that was like mostly queer and trans people who really cared about this movie, who I trusted to not, you know, do anything creepy, but also to like be able to have the hard conversations like, you know, we're shooting in a strip club. Like we want to be super thoughtful about how we're doing that and how we're entering that space and how we're talking about intimacy, and the fact that I had so many people on set that I could trust to not only like do the right thing, but hold each other to do the right thing, hold me to do the right thing, like made it just such a beautiful process. I just think sometimes being on set, especially on like a short film that has no money, is just like the most beautiful way to express queer community, because we're just like all doing things, lifting sandbags and helping each other and like eating crappy pizza, and it can just be such a beautiful thing when it goes right.
100% agree. 100% agree. I have another big question for everyone. Also, we're getting close towards the end, but I have a couple more questions. A huge part of why Arno and I wanted to create this series was to have more avenues for people to connect to queer and trans narratives. And of course, I feel like every time I'm on a Q&A with other queer and trans filmmakers, this question gets asked, and I want to pose it to you all so we can sort of wrestle with it. But can you speak to how you think about the future of queer and trans stories? What feels important to you at this moment? A lot of times people frame that as like, what else do you want to see? What more do you want? Also want to know, where do we go from this moment? I also wrote down, what are the vibes? Like, where are we? What's going on? So I'd love to hear from each of you about like the future and looking towards that you want to see. It's a big question, but whoever can take it.
I feel like Livia, yeah, go ahead.
I unmuted myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm very excited to see queer cinema that feels very free to be exactly what it wants to be, without having to explain itself or feel the burden of being didactic or of like asking to be valued. Because I feel like sometimes I mean, as if you're someone that experiences marginalization in all different sorts of ways, like you often feel like the art you make has to speak for your humanity, and and that feels like begging to me, and it doesn't work. And it like I don't want to make that, you know. I want us to feel empowered enough to feel that you can make anything, and to have that kind of fullness of an experience where like life isn't so easily lived for other people's understanding of it. I think that's what I'm really interested in seeing and doing.
I think a few years ago, I would have liked to have seen more complex depictions of sexuality and its fluidness. But I've actually, in the past couple of years, I've actually been pleasantly surprised at how much more we've been seeing that, and like the normalization of queerness and of its complexities and like the different forms it takes. So that's been really that's been really great. But I think like I had like a personal experience where I had like a coming of age queer script that I wrote that was turned down by a producer because he had produced another queer coming of age story that was completely different from mine, but it didn't do very well. And he felt like queer coming of age stories aren't hot right now. And I think that this is kind of like true of any film that that explores characters that are a bit more underrepresented. But I would like for us to like not see queer as like a genre per se, and you know, under like queer can be, you can have queer characters in horror films and spy movies and rom-coms. You know, I mean, it's not a genre in and of itself. So I think that's something I would like to see change.
I don't know. It's hard to sum it up. I think like I'm really excited about queer form of film too, as well as subject, and just it's exciting to me when I see like what used to be experimental kind of getting into like more mainstream film and people interacting with it, and then maybe like, you know, I don't know, we're always pushing the boundaries more. And I think like I am really most inspired by people who are doing stuff that is might not be legible to everybody, and having that be okay is really exciting.
I'm really excited about like championing these like new queer and trans actors. I think especially I work a lot in television, and especially like in packaging television or in packaging films, everyone's like, okay, but who's the star going to be? You know, and like, you know, if I'm writing about, you know, a Latinx trans man, like there isn't a star that I can attach to the movie, but there are so many amazing actors out there who fit the role and who deserve to be on the screen. And I'm just like really wanting to like get them cast in any and all roles, partially because I think all of, you know, there's so much queer and trans talent that hasn't broken into the mainstream yet, just because people are narrow-minded about casting. But I'm really hopeful for that. And then selfishly, I'm like, great. So then you can attach to all of my projects and I can sell them because you're going to be a movie star. And then I can say that, you know, you're working on my show. But really, I right now, I'm just like, how can I help young queer and trans actors like get out there? And these film festivals are one way, but, you know, I can't harass all the casting directors on my own. So for now, I'm just like making sure any TV show I work on has at least one trans character, so that they have to cast them.
Right. We need all of us to push everything forward. So with that, we want to wrap up, but I think this would be a good segue to just ask like what you might be working on right now, or otherwise, like where can our audience next see your work or learn more about your work in future projects? Feel free, whoever, to chime in.
Well, you can find out more about what I'm doing at kirafinling.com. It's the best way. And I'm working on a couple shorts right now, a little documentary about Get Real Girls, which are these like sporty lesbian Barbies that I played with as a kid. And also a more experimental animated piece about girlhood, and I don't know, it's very hard to sum up very early, but it's exciting. And watching all these films, I just felt so inspired to go make more stuff and make more queer films. So I'm really thankful to have been part of the series.
I guess for me, website oliviahuang.com. I have another short that's at festivals right now. I think Who Can and More Happiness, the new short. They're both at Frameline right now, but now I'm losing track of what's coming up. So whatever, that'll be on my website. And I'm supposed to be writing a feature, which is about a younger woman stalking an older woman, but we'll see if that actually happens.
I'll also plug my website, mweinstein.com. But I am turning the short into a feature right now, working on scripts, working on finding producers, and working on a whole bunch of extremely, extremely gay TV, which is great.
I am finishing my first short through the Jacob Burns Creative Culture Program, which is going to eventually become a feature. I'm currently in the early stages of my second short through Creative Culture, just writing the script. I'll be shooting that at the end of the summer. And I've also sold a pilot to Amazon that's kind of Fargo meets Twin Peaks, very different from The Morning After. So I'm in development of that right now, and hopefully that'll be streaming on your TVs in a couple of years.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here. Britt, you have something to say.
I was just going to say amazing too. I want to say thank you so much to our filmmakers that joined us. A huge part of QT Shorts and a huge thing that we hope happens is that the filmmakers in this program, in our series, who apply, who are around, who are on these film projects, that we become a community in New York, in LA, in everywhere, anywhere, online. I think something that feels really special about this conversation that we're having is that these don't get to happen a lot. I feel like it happens at festivals and on some virtual Q&As, but I'm hoping we can bring this into the real world and continue conversations and building community with other queer and trans filmmakers. And it's sort of already happening right here. I want to say thank you so much to our supporters. Thank you so much to Jacob Burns for letting us use your virtual platform and bringing these films to your audience, as well as our audience in Brooklyn and New York City. Thank you, Arno, for running tech and being an amazing co-curator with me. Thank you to everyone watching. And with that, I think that's all the thanks, right?
That's all the thanks. Thank you all again. Bye.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.